This case is so bizarre and it sounds completely fake, but I promise it's true. If you've never heard of Agneta Westlund before, then I can guarantee that you will not be expecting what happens at the end. Hi, my name's Yasmin and I make videos about things that are scary or disturbing or just true crime. Every single story I tell is true, and if you'd like to follow along, then please subscribe and give the video a thumbs up and I will get on with the rest of it. Agneta and Ingemar met when they were in their late teens. Their love blossomed and they ended up eloping when they were in their 20s. They ended up having 2 beautiful daughters who eventually grew up and left the nest, leaving the couple to be on their own when they retired in their 60s. Ingemar's love for Agneta never faltered. Even after all these years, he showed his wife how much he loved her on a daily basis. After their kids left home, Agneta and Ingemar decided to also move to a farm in a village called Loftahammar in Sweden. They had a pretty ideal retirement. Both of them had some hobbies, they tended to their animals, and they were very social with the community around them. They also owned a small black dog, which kept both of them relatively active because they'd go on daily walks with this dog, and life was pretty good. Generally speaking, Sweden is a very safe place to live, which is why the events that follow were just so unusual and shocked the community. Especially in a small village in Sweden, this is almost unheard of. It was a pretty chilly autumnal afternoon on Friday, 7th of September 2008. It was starting to get pretty dark and Agneta was due for her daily walk with their dog named Jock. So apparently her husband was busy on a ride-on lawnmower tidying up the garden a little bit when she let him know that she was going to go for this walk with the dog. He said that's fine, he won't be coming, he's going to keep mowing the lawns before it gets dark. And she said, you know, it's fine. So Agneta went back inside, she popped on her coat, got the leash, and went out with a very excited dog. They walked along a trail that was quite familiar to both of them. So the trail involved them going through a forest, and then eventually they'd end up at a lake, they'd circle around the lake, and then they'd come back home via the forest. Sometimes the walks would take a little bit longer if Agneta came across, I don't know, someone that she knew on her walk. Sometimes she would pick some wild mushrooms for dinner and she'd bring that home, and it would just take a little bit longer. But sometimes they'd have a pretty short walk and then they'd be back home in no time. Today though, she decided to take an extra long walk. It was starting to get properly dark outside and Ingemar was already inside waiting for his wife to come home. He'd planned a special evening for them where they were going to watch this TV program together, so he was ready to go, but his wife just hadn't turned up yet and it was like pretty pitch black outside. He was starting to get quite worried, but initially he was like, you know, maybe she's just taken a longer walk, so I'll just keep waiting. He waited and waited and it was like 9 or 10 in the evening, and this is when he started getting really worried. He just had this sick feeling inside that something was just off. So he tried calling her, no answer. Called again, no answer. So he tried to call some of her friends because maybe she stopped off to say hello to a friend. None of them knew where she was and they were kind of worried that Agneta wasn't at home at this time. What was taking her so long on this walk? So Ingemar actually set out into the night himself to go looking for his wife. He put on a coat and scarf and prepared himself for the cold evening outside, and he took the trail that he thought Agneta was most likely to take. He went through the forest. There was no signs that anything had been dropped in the forest or that anything suspicious had happened, and eventually he ended up at the lake. But when he got to the lake, this was a completely different story. Ingemar came across probably his worst nightmare. By the bank of the lake, he saw his wife's lifeless body lying there with obvious wounds covering her entire body. He searched for any signs of life, but she was absolutely freezing cold and unresponsive. Her clothes were torn apart, her skin had these like lacerations all over them. It just looked like a brutal attack. After the initial shock of what Ingemar had seen, he got his phone out and he called the police for help. Immediately, it was clear to them that this was a homicide because there's as I said, there's no way that her body could have gotten into this state without some sort of weapon or attack of some kind. Agneta's body was quickly taken away for an autopsy examination to figure out cause of death, whilst in the meantime Ingemar was brought to the station for questioning. Ingemar, of course, denied having any involvement in the death of his beloved wife. He was a grieving husband, and in his darkest moments, the police decided to arrest him then and there. As you can imagine, Ingemar was totally shocked. His daughters were totally shocked by this completely ridiculous accusation. This man has dedicated 42 years of marriage to the love of his life. They never had any problems between them, so how could this be happening? The tight-knit community that they lived in were totally shaken up by this, and they were actually disgusted by what Ingemar had done. They had no doubt that he had caused the death of his wife. The autopsy results finally came out, and Agneta's body was so badly mutilated that they actually had a hard time finding out what the murder weapon even was. In her cuts, there was also strange debris like animal fur and saliva and just bits of soil. Her skin was torn up like it was cut up by multiple blades going across in all sorts of directions. They were sort of thinking, how could Ingemar have done this? What weapon did he use? And then they remembered that he's got a ride-on lawnmower that he was using that day. The police speculated that Ingemar actually rode over her with the ride-on lawnmower and then somehow transported her body to the lake to make it look like she was attacked by somebody else. The police looked into the lawnmower blades, and lo and behold, there was blood found in them. But luckily it wasn't human blood. It was actually from another animal that must have been living in the grass, and he just accidentally mowed over them. There was actually no hard evidence now that they figured out that it was animal blood that Ingemar actually did it, so they had to release him from police custody. He was in custody for 10 days until these results came out. His daughters picked him up and they took him far away from the village because the people were still furious that he had done this to his wife. They just didn't believe that he was an innocent man. They thought he'd just gotten away with murder, and they refused to live in the same area as him. Ingemar was still a suspect though, and police were doing everything in their power to prove that he was the one that did it. They tested their lawnmower theory again by getting a pig and dressing the pig up in denim to sort of mimic what Agneta was wearing that night, and they mowed over the pig to see what would happen. And it was actually pretty surprising. The pig's skin got hardly any damage, and the majority of the damage actually happened to the denim that was lying over top of the pig. It also stopped the lawnmower from working properly, so it's extremely unlikely that Ingemar actually killed his wife in this way, which again disproved the theory that this is what may have happened. But finally, there was a super unexpected break in the case. This happened in January 2009, and it led to Ingemar finally getting cleared as a suspect. One day, one of the detectives in the department on the case was browsing through YouTube, and he stumbled across a video of a Canadian moose violently kicking a person, apparently. This video completely changed the direction of the entire case, because they started to think outside of the box. Agneta was most likely attacked by a large animal, which explains the animal fur and the saliva found on her body, but not just any large animal. This is what is thought to have happened to her by the lakeside that night. Near the lake where Agneta was found, there was that forest that I mentioned earlier. That forest has a lot of apple trees, but during autumn these apples start to fall to the ground. When they fall to the ground, they start to actually naturally ferment, and when they ferment, they produce an excessive amount of alcohol in them. So it means that if someone consumed the apple, if a human or an animal consumed the apple, then they'd get pretty drunk quite quickly. Elks or moose, whatever you like to call them, are very popular in this area. And it's actually thought that an elk consumed a copious amount of these fermented apples, which resulted in intoxication and extreme agitation in the animal, that when it came across Agneta and the dog, it brutally attacked and trampled her. When they tested what sort of animal fur was found on Agneta's body, it was the fur of an elk. Ingemar now no longer lives in the small village because people still believe he got away with murder to this day, and that the elk theory is completely wild and unbelievable. And that's why he lives alone near his 2 daughters, and now he's got 6 grandchildren in a completely different area of Sweden. He's gone through so much stress and grief, and none of it can really be undone anymore. In fact, I think he's actually written a book about his experiences and how traumatized he is from the whole event. Apparently, he was wrongly accused, and they blame it on a drunken elk. And that was the story of what happened to Agneta Westlund. If you found this story interesting and you'd like to hear more stories like this, then please subscribe, and I will see you next week. Bye.